Welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're going to be tackling some pretty heavy stuff, I think.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at Thomas Hobbes.
Thomas Hobbes.
17th century English philosopher.
Yes.
And
big thinker.
Huge thinker.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people know him for that kind of intense quote.
Oh, yeah.
Man is wolf to man.
Right.
But I think there's a lot more to him.
There is. Lots to unpack there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at his life, his works, and even see how his ideas connect to a play from ancient Rome.
Interesting.
And to kind of bring it all home and make it relevant to us today, we've got some modern perspectives on Hobbes as well.
I mean, it's fascinating how his ideas, even though they're so rooted in his time, 17th century England, they still resonate with us today.
Yeah.
He was dealing with questions about power and violence and the nature of freedom. I mean, these are things that we're still grappling with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about it, he was born in 1588.
Right.
Literally as the Spanish Armada was threatening to invade England.
Yeah, all that turmoil.
Talk about a tumultuous time to be born.
Yeah, and then he lives through the English Civil War, sees a king executed. I mean, his life was just full of upheaval.
And it's almost ironic that this is a guy who championed absolute monarchy, but then had to live through
adapt to a republic.
Monarchy falling apart and adapt to a republic.
Under Cromwell. Yeah. It really makes you wonder how those events shaped his thinking.
Yeah.
About the need for a strong state.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading about his relationship with the Cavendish family.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just blown away that he served as a tutor.
He did.
For not one.
Not one, not two.
But 4 generations. Of the Cavendish family.
It's amazing.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it wasn't just a teaching role. It was like a real intellectual partnership.
Yes.
He traveled with them. He debated with them.
Wow.
They entrusted him with their affairs.
That's a serious long-term gig.
It is.
I mean, that speaks volumes about
the trust.
The trust and the respect that they had for Hobbes.
Absolutely. And that connection to the aristocracy really shaped his whole worldview. It gave him access to knowledge and resources and this really unique perspective on how power works.
And then there's that story about him coming across Euclid's Elements.
Oh, yeah. Later in life.
And it was like this.
It was a revelation for him.
Yeah, a total revelation.
He even claimed, I think, that he would see geometric shapes. When he closed his eyes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was that all about?
Well, his fascination with geometry is really key to understanding his whole approach to philosophy.
Okay.
He came to believe that geometry held this kind of universal key to understanding the world, that even something as complex as politics could be broken down using axioms and logical deductions.
So it's like, instead of relying on tradition or religious doctrine, he wanted to use this almost mathematical,
a very rigorous
logical reasoning to understand human behavior.
Exactly. And this led him to some pretty radical conclusions.
Okay.
One of the most controversial was his materialist view of humanity. The idea that humans are essentially complex machines.
So no soul, no divine spark or anything like that.
Just a physical system responding to stimuli.
That's pretty far out there for the 17th century.
It was a radical idea.
Yeah.
He rejected free will.
Really?
Said it was incompatible with the cause and effects universe.
Wow.
Yeah.
That makes his famous quote, "Man is wolf to man," even more interesting.
Right.
I mean, I always thought of that as like a cynical view of human nature.
Yeah, Hobbes is a pessimist.
Right.
But I think there's more to it than that.
So people take that quote out of context.
They do.
Why?
Hobbes wasn't saying that humans are inherently evil.
Okay.
He was talking about how we behave outside of society in a state of nature where there are no rules.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's like in that kind of environment.
Right.
Without any kind of structure.
Without rules, without enforcement.
Or enforcement, people would just revert back to.
It would be a free-for-all.
This kind of primal.
Survival of the fittest.
Survival mentality. It's like wolves fighting over scraps.
Precisely.
Yeah.
He called it a war of all against all.
Wow.
Driven by fear and self-preservation.
So it's not about being bad.
No.
It's about
the conditions. The circumstances.
That create that kind of behavior.
Those bad qualities, those instincts.
Exactly.
And this is where his idea of the Leviathan comes in.
Ah, yes, the Leviathan.
I mean, that's a pretty intense image.
It is a powerful image. I mean, it's this monstrous sea creature from the Bible.
Right out of the book of Job.
So he uses that deliberately.
Very deliberately.
Yeah.
He describes the Leviathan as this all-powerful state.
Okay.
A kind of mortal god.
A mortal god.
That arises out of the social contract.
Okay.
To maintain order. And prevent us from descending into chaos.
So it's like this necessary evil.
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do we give up some freedom for security?
Is that the trade-off?
It's a question that's been debated for centuries.
Yeah.
And it's something that we'll be exploring further.
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I'm already seeing how his ideas are relevant today.
They are.
This is going to be a thought-provoking deep dive, for sure.
It will. Buckle up.
I know, I'm ready. So we've got this picture of the Leviathan, this powerful state that's supposed to keep us from,
falling apart.
Right, keeping things in order.
But where does individual freedom fit into all this? That's where Hobbes gets really interesting and maybe a little uncomfortable for us.
Okay.
Because he had a very particular, and some might say limited view of what freedom actually means.
Okay, so how so?
For Hobbes, freedom wasn't really about individual rights or self-expression or those kinds of things. It was all about the absence of physical restraint.
So basically, as long as you're not in chains,
exactly,
you're free.
You're free.
Even if you're living under some kind of dictator.
Even under an authoritarian ruler.
Okay. That doesn't really line up
it does.
with how we think about freedom today.
Not at all. I mean, we tend to think about things like freedom of speech and freedom of thought.
Right.
The right to participate in government.
All those kinds of things.
All those things. Yeah. Hobbes considered those kind of secondary to the fundamental need for order and security.
It's like he's saying, hey, look, at least you're not living in some Mad Max wasteland.
Right. Exactly.
Where it's everyone for themselves.
At least there's some semblance of order. He genuinely believed that a limited freedom under a strong ruler was preferable to that kind of constant threat of violence.
Yeah, I can see how living through the English Civil War might lead you to that conclusion.
Right, exactly. Witnessing all that chaos and bloodshed.
Yeah.
So it really makes you think about how our ideas of freedom are shaped by the times we live in, by our experiences.
Yeah.
Now, to really get a handle on this idea of trade-offs, we need to dig into Hobbes's ideas about natural rights and natural laws.
Okay, so I get the sense that those two concepts are kind of two sides of the same coin for him.
They are very much intertwined.
Okay, so in Hobbes's view, what's the difference?
Right. So for Hobbes, the right of nature is this absolute kind of primal freedom.
Okay.
It's the freedom to do whatever it takes to survive.
So it's that like gut level instinct.
Exactly. It's pure self-preservation.
So protect yourself.
Even if it means harming others.
Wow. So it sounds like that instinct is what he thinks leads to that war of all against all.
It's the root of the problem.
So then where does natural law come in?
Well, here's the thing. He argues that this unlimited freedom, this right of nature, taken to its extreme, it actually becomes self-defeating.
How so?
Because it creates a state of constant fear and anxiety.
Okay.
Nobody can trust anyone else. Everyone's just trying to survive.
So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
In a way, yeah. So natural law, according to Hobbes, is this realization that we're actually better off giving up some of that absolute freedom in exchange for the security of a strong state.
Gotcha.
A state that can enforce rules and protect us from each other.
So it's like you're saying trading in that right to be a lone wolf for the safety of the pack.
You got it.
But then how do you prevent the alpha wolf, or in this case, the Leviathan, from turning on the pack itself?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that Hobbes's critics have been wrestling with for centuries.
Yeah, because he's basically saying that the sovereign's power...
It has to be absolute.
Has to be absolute.
Okay. There can't be any checks and balances.
To be effective.
Because any division of power would weaken the state.
I see. So he's saying that would just make it more vulnerable.
Exactly. It would open the door for chaos to creep back in.
But isn't that a bit risky? I mean, couldn't absolute power lead to tyranny?
That's the fear, isn't it? And Hobbes didn't really have a good answer for that.
So how did he think you could prevent the Leviathan from abusing its power?
He seemed to think that the fear of returning to that chaotic state of nature would be enough to keep the Leviathan in check.
But his critics say that's not really a guarantee.
Not a very strong guarantee. They worry that an absolute ruler could easily become a tyrant.
Yeah, suppress dissent.
Exactly, and abuse their power.
It's almost like the cure could be worse than the disease.
That's a great way to put it. And this really gets to the heart of the debate about security versus liberty.
Right, that balance.
It's a balancing act, and we're still trying to figure it out.
So let's talk a bit more about this image of the Leviathan. Why do you think Hobbes chose to represent the state with this, like, mythical, monstrous figure?
Well, I think he was going for a few things.
Okay.
First, he wanted to emphasize how artificial the state actually is.
Okay.
It's not something that occurs naturally like a family or a tribe.
Okay.
It's something that humans create.
For a specific purpose.
Exactly. To establish order, to bring stability.
Got it.
It's like a machine designed to keep us from destroying ourselves.
So the Leviathan, this biblical sea monster,
right,
is meant to symbolize that power.
The immense power of the state.
So it's like a protector.
On the one hand, yes.
On the one hand, but also this potential tyrant.
On the other hand.
On the other.
Exactly. That duality is central to Hobbes' whole philosophy.
It's fascinating and a little scary at the same time.
It is.
And it's easy to see how living through something like the English Civil War,
right,
witnessing all that violence and chaos,
seeing a king executed,
would shape your view of the world.
Definitely.
Yeah, like it makes sense that he would come to believe so strongly
in a strong state,
in the need for that strong state.
Absolutely.
But it's important to remember that his ideas have been debated and criticized,
of course,
for centuries.
Rightly so.
Right. And those criticisms are still relevant today.
They are.
This whole idea of absolute sovereignty, of giving up individual rights for the sake of security.
It's a tough question.
It is. It makes you think about what kind of world we want to live in.
It does.
And what price we're willing to pay.
What are we willing to sacrifice?
For peace.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what makes studying Hobbes so interesting.
It is.
He doesn't give us all the answers.
He doesn't give us easy answers.
But he forces us to think.
He makes us grapple with those fundamental dilemmas.
About power.
Of human society.
Freedom. Human nature.
Yeah, he really gets you thinking.
He does. So I'm starting to see how his ideas are still relevant today.
They are.
Even though he lived centuries ago.
He was ahead of his time in many ways.
He was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like he's holding up this mirror to human nature.
Yeah.
Saying like, look, this is
who we are.
This is who we are.
Warts and all.
Warts and all.
Yeah. He's not afraid to challenge those kind of rosy views of humanity.
Right. Like that we're all inherently good.
Exactly. He really believed that without some kind of structure, some constraints, our self-interest would lead us right back to conflict and chaos.
So not exactly a feel-good philosophy.
No, not really a Hallmark card.
But maybe there's some value in that, like, unflinching perspective.
I think there is.
It makes you think about things differently.
It forces us to be more realistic about human nature.
And to really appreciate that peace.
Yeah.
Isn't something that just happens.
It's not a given.
Yeah, we have to work at it.
It takes effort. It takes vigilance.
Right.
And maybe it even takes a willingness to accept some limitations.
On our freedom.
Exactly.
So he's basically saying, like, look, we can't just wish for a better world.
Right.
We have to create it.
We have to build it.
Yeah. And that might mean
making tough choices.
Making some difficult choices and some compromises.
Yeah, it's all about trade-offs.
And those trade-offs.
Yeah.
I mean, those are at the heart of so many of the challenges that we face.
Still to this day.
Today.
Yeah.
Like, how much freedom are we willing to give up in exchange for security?
Exactly.
How much power should we give to the government?
How do we balance individual rights with the needs of society as a whole?
I mean, those are huge questions.
They are the big questions
that every society struggles with.
And Hobbes gives us a framework for thinking about them.
Yeah, he doesn't give us all the answers.
He doesn't.
But he makes us think about the right questions.
He does.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into the world of Thomas Hobbes, I can't help but wonder, is a world without some form of Leviathan even possible?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Can we have peace and security?
Can we have a functioning society?
Without some form of centralized authority?
Hobbes would say no.
Yeah, he'd probably say we just descend into chaos.
He'd say it's human nature.
Yeah.
But maybe there are other possibilities.
Maybe
there are other ways to organize ourselves.
Right.
That could allow for both freedom and security.
Yeah, maybe it's not about choosing one or the other, but finding that balance.
Finding a way to make them work together.
So that we have individual freedom.
Yeah.
But we also have ways to prevent
the breakdown of society.
That kind of anarchy that Hobbes was...
that he feared so much.
So afraid of.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
It's a huge challenge.
But it's one that I think we'll continue to grapple with.
For a long time to come.
For a long time.
Yeah.
Hobbes' legacy, I think, is not so much about providing us with all the answers.
Right.
But it's about helping us to
asking the right questions.
Those tough questions.
Exactly.
He reminds us that human society is complicated.
It is.
It's messy.
Like a balancing act.
And that balance is something that we have to constantly be working on.
Yeah.
This has been a really thought-provoking deep dive.
It has.
I don't know about you, but I'm definitely...
My brain is full.
Yeah, my brain is full.
Yeah.
Hobbes may not have all the answers.
He doesn't.
But he certainly knew how to ask the right questions.
He did.
Well, that's it for this deep dive into the world of Thomas Hobbes.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning,
and keep diving deep.